So welcome to Hoop HR Highlights, a podcast brought to you by a team of expert recruiters at Hoop. My name's Emily Summerhayes, and this is the 5th episode in our series. And we're always keen to speak to anyone in the professional services space about anything HR related. So please do get in touch. You can subscribe to our channel on YouTube or Spotify at Hoop HR Highlights. So today's topic is equality and diversity, and specifically the employer's response to somebody who is going through a gender transition. The CIPD's inclusion at work research has found that LGBT and employees are more likely to experience workplace conflict and harassment than those who are heterosexual or cisgender. And according to this research, 55% of trans workers have experienced this conflict, and 18% of trans workers feel psychologically unsafe in the workplace. So I'm really honoured today to be able to speak to a very successful finance professional, Sophie Morris, who has herself been through a gender reassignment surgery. Now, Sophie has very kindly agreed to share her life experience and how this has impacted her working life. And we really hope that by sharing her very personal story, any employers listening may take some valuable insights. And if they need to support an employee going through a transition, they can then strive to make that experience a positive one. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sophie.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no problem at all. So first of all, I'm going to ask you a really kind of open question, which is, what does equality and diversity mean to you?
Yeah, well, it's about everyone having the same access and choices and opportunities as everybody else, really. That diversity side of it ensures that cultures of organisations have a variety of backgrounds and opinions in which to sort of choose from. And I think it's quite a difficult sort of subject for many people because I think we naturally gravitate towards people who are familiar to us and sort of have a background familiar to us. And that's why I think a lot of people struggle to find diversity in the culture, really, of their organisations. I find it quite useful to talk about labels sometimes. It's a case that I think if you were applying a label to myself, you might apply the label of being a woman, being trans, being an accountant, and things like that. And I think when you're applying those labels, provided there's sort of a little bit of basis behind them, I think it's a good thing, really, to understand people. But it's a case that it's when you start applying labels which are inappropriate, then, which lead to sort of prejudices because you've applied one label, you're assuming another label. And I think that sort of equality and diversity is important to sort of point that out because there are things that we all have in common, I think, as people.
Absolutely. And I think so many, equality and diversity is at the top of agenda of so many HR departments at the moment. And I think that it's kind of breaking that down, isn't it, to what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis and how is it actually going to be put into practice? That is the difficult part, isn't it? Because it's kind of winning hearts and minds and really educating people as well.
Absolutely. It's something which you can see many organisations, I think, quite recently struggled with that because I think they have naturally gravitated to people who are familiar with themselves.
And can you talk a little bit sort of, about your personal journey, as to why we are talking today?
Yeah, so I think it was 2007, I made the decision to change gender from male to female. It was a case that that journey was quite a difficult journey. It's something I've been struggling with for most of my life.
Yeah.
And it's something which that first step was a bit of self-acceptance, really. It was something which I struggled with for so long. And I think it got to a point where I think I could feel myself, my life being a little bit empty, missing a lot of what I was, and probably slipping into a little bit of sort of mental health issues with regards to that. And so that's what sort of drove me to sort of make that decision then to actually change gender. The journey itself for any trans person is quite a sort of long, drawn-out process, but perhaps starting with sort of communications with doctors or psychiatrists to sort of help support you through a lot of that, for maybe advice or maybe sort of assessment, or maybe even hormone treatment and things as you're going through it. But it's not something you just accept yourself. It's something you do battle with yourself, really, that self-acceptance first.
Absolutely. And I know when we spoke recently, we were talking quite a lot about, how much does go on. I mean, when it's happening in the workplace, I suppose the employer is thinking about the situation at hand. But actually, there's so much going on personally, for the person going through it in their home life, and their personal life, and their mental health as well.
Absolutely. I think telling my friends and family was a very difficult sort of situation. You never know how people are going to react to it. Some people might react positively to it, and other people might react very negatively to it. So it's something which can, especially if you've sort of got family and things like that, it makes it even more difficult, really, if you have children to think about, or even sort of the relationship that you're in, that you're coming out to. So it's a case that it is thrown out a lot of personal sort of issues before you actually tell work itself.
Definitely. And, and when you do tell work, they never know. You could have had that conversation with your children or your partner or something, a few days before, which I'm sure was even harder again, to have had. So how did you approach your employer at the time to make them aware that you were going to be going through a transition?
So I had been planning it out for some time. It was a case that I had chosen a particular time as Christmas, funny enough, which was, it was simply because I felt that people were a bit more understanding and a bit more sort of happier at that time of year. And that was my choice, really. Then sort of went to the employer about sort of 2 months before that and told them of my decision about that. And everything seemed to be going quite sort of accepting at that particular point. They'd engaged ACAS to support them through that. And we agreed a timetable for how it would actually occur as well within that organisation.
Okay. And how did, so they reacted quite well at that point. And then was there any kind of changes then, did you feel, in the way that your colleagues and peers treated you in the workplace at that point, or was did everything go quite smoothly?
Everything went quite smoothly at that point. It wasn't until a little bit later where I noticed sort of a lot of my responsibilities were being reduced, really, within that organisation. And also I wasn't getting meeting invites anymore to certain meetings. And it was really sort of emails that were coming to me were quite of a sort of bullying nature, addressing sort of different concerns. And it felt, to be honest, like I was being managed out at that particular point. And I think I addressed that by sort of keeping a record of a lot of the events that were happening during that process. And it kind of all accumulated for about 12 months, really, where that relationship sort of deteriorated. Like I say, I think colleagues were quite sort of supportive at first. And I think as a point, because of things being reduced responsibility, the bullying, I think my own mental health struggled, and relationships with colleagues struggled as a point of that. And so it kind of accumulated to about, well, it's about the anniversary, actually, 12 months after, which I was dismissed from that job just before Christmas then.
And did you sort of, how did that make you feel when you were going to work every day?
I was absolute in a mess at that particular point. I think my mental health was deteriorating month on month, really. And I think there was a little bit of relief as well, a little bit of the actual dismissal, in one sense, that to sort of be able to step away from that organisation, because it become quite toxic, really, to work there. And at home, I was constantly in tears, really.
Oh, and do you the way that you sort of saw the shift in the change of how you were treated, do you think that was a lot down to sort of a lack of understanding from colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is a little bit of uh, discrimination through somebody else, if you like. It's a case of it's not me that feels this way, that you shouldn't be involved in that activity. We're just worried at how other people accept it. And so rather than sort of address that and deal with that, I think that they took the approach of leaving me out of things.
And that must have felt terrible. And when I think, you mentioned that you were dismissed from that position and you were out of work then for a while, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So it was a case that I was a member of a union, but the union and the solicitors didn't support me because they felt that there was less than a 50% chance of actually getting that court case. So I took it on myself through tribunal. And it was a case of 10 days hearing in court with the company, and the judge found in favour of myself, really, that it was unfair dismissal and sex discrimination.
And I know as a result of sort of your experience, you had a gap as well in your CV. Where you were going through this, your tribunal, and I know that you were quite worried about that because we talked about that recently, and it's almost like then when you were applying for other jobs, how would you explain that gap in the CV, and how did you actually overcome that when you were questioned when applying for other jobs in the future?
Becoming an accountant was a career change for myself. So I've gone through the ACCA education system to become an accountant. And essentially, because it was a career change, my CV now starts with the experience that I have since being an accountant. And that's sort of it's the relevant part to the employer as well, really, within that. When I'm doing a cover note or personal statement, I kind of make reference to my previous career and things like that, the experience that I had within that, because some of that is still relevant to my current role. But in interviews, I found the best approach is honesty. I've never hidden the fact because I don't feel it's anything to be ashamed of. But what I've been through. But I think that if an employer wasn't accepting of that, I probably wouldn't want to work with them anyway.
Exactly. And, it might be quite telling sort of through a process if you do get a certain reaction, that might not be where you want to be spending your days.
Absolutely. And I've got to say, though, in fairness, that's not something I've ever come across. I found employers to be quite accepting of that and quite grateful for the honesty.
Brilliant. And, have you got any sort of tips or to how employers maybe should be sensitive to this about when asking about gaps in CVs?
I think just accept what somebody's actually telling you, unless you find anything which is any different. Really, it's a case that just say basically, thank you for your honesty, and move on from that topic of conversation, unless you have any particular concerns that are relevant to that particular job.
Yeah, just sort of ask it and move on.
Yes.
So in terms of, your experience when you actually made your employer aware of your transition, it sounds like at the beginning you felt like you were supported, but then things over that 12 months obviously took a turn. What steps, is there anything that on reflection when you look back that your employer could have taken to ensure that you had better support through that?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, mental health issues and things like that in work have improved immensely, well-being in work, and how that sort of affects people in jobs in general, not just for trans people, but everyone. But it is about being inclusive and involving trans people in who have transitioned within the roles and things like that, and making sure that they're still involved in a lot of the things that they are doing and listening to them. But it's about sort of when somebody comes up and addresses it in the first place, so they want to transition, it's about talking about how you want to come out in the first place, how you manage the facilities, toilets, and things like that, any dress codes that the organisation has, and name changes as well, and the pronouns that you're using, and to actually help them through that transition. It's about letting that person feel like they're in control of the actual transition itself, so that they feel comforted through any of the anxieties that they might be feeling at that particular point, but then monitoring them as they're going through it. And I think this is the bit that it failed on that previous employers, that I don't think they understood a lot of the pressures after transition that I might be feeling from not being invited to meetings and things like that. So speak to people's colleagues and things to actually work out how do you feel they're doing and coping with that transition. But also a trans person going through something like that will have a lot of home issues as well, which they're dealing with, still dealing with their friends and family, adapting to it personally, and the personal stresses and anxieties of life. And so it's about keeping up that conversation with them, so that they do understand that they've got someone to go to. And a lot of this is covered in a lot of the well-being of organisations in general, but there are some sort of unique things which trans people are going through. And I think if you've had a little bit of negative experience in the past, you tend to be a little bit guarded against sort of signs, or alerted to signs that may be sort of taking people down that route. And so trans people may be a little bit more be a bit more understanding to that as well, really.
And I suppose as well, it depends. Some organisations have very large, sort of fully functioning HR departments who are kind of equipped to deal with situations where, it might be something, different to what they've dealt with in the past, whether I think smaller organisations may not have that HR representative. And in those situations, like who would be the person that would, communicate, I suppose, these things? So things about, you mentioned the toilets, the dress code. Who would communicate that to the rest of the wider organisation?
I think when it was at the organisation I worked at, it was certainly the actual coming out part of it was a group session, so that everybody was involved and everybody understood it. I wasn't present at that. That was my wish. So ACAS kind of led that. And you can get a lot of support from people like ACAS or Stonewall Cymru, where they can actually get some advice on it like that and support with them like that. But it is important to talk to that person. And I don't think you need a big HR department or anything to have that conversation like that.
Absolutely. And I think the CIPD encourages employers to assess each situation on a case-by-case basis, and kind of listen and then seek that advice to enable the colleagues to be supported. Because I think every case is different, every organisation is different. But it's interesting, that ACAS were able to come in and talk to the group. I didn't realise that. So that's really interesting. And how did that make you feel?
I felt a lot better about it, to be honest, doing it like that. It gave, because I wasn't there, then anybody who had concerns could actually ask them. Without me being present and without feeling intimidated that I'm there. So it was a nice open conversation, I believe.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned about the use of pronouns, and that's something that's been encouraged a lot by employers. What are your thoughts around this? And what would you say to those who don't really understand the importance of it?
It's very important to somebody that they sort of identify with who they are. And so calling them by he or she or they or them, it is very important really within that culture, but also the new name that they might acquire as well in that transition. People will make mistakes, and I think that's fine. I think people are accepting of that. Just apologize and move on from it. It's a case that I don't think those honest mistakes are going to cause any issues, and don't feel too bad about it either. It does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note that, because it's a change for the people that are addressing you differently as well, isn't it? You know, so it's just a change for everybody, and having that sort of understanding from both sides is really important.
Absolutely. I think culturally, I think we're used to sort of dealing with male colleagues perhaps differently to female colleagues, and vice versa. So it is a case that there is a lot of adaptation in that for both parties, the trans person and the other people within the organisation. So it is important that both sides take that into account.
Definitely. And I think, you know, we've talked about the experience you had when you went through the transition, but I'm really pleased to hear that actually you've had some really good experiences since you started your finance career in 2013, and your experiences have been really positive since. How do you think those companies that you've worked for since have been different?
I think awareness in companies is so much better these days anyway, I think, and support and policies are much better in most organizations, I think. I haven't had any issues whatsoever since moving on from that first organization. And I've worked in a variety of different industries, including an accounting professional firm and an aircraft engineering company, Cardiff Aviation, which owned by Bruce Dickinson, the Iron Maiden singer. They took me on despite everything that was the sort of male-dominated culture that was there, I guess, or environment that we were working in. And I never had any issues there whatsoever. It was one of the best places I've worked, really. And now working in charities and sort of housing, it's a case that everybody's a lot more aware and supportive anyway, I think.
Fantastic. And do you think that the world is more accepting now to where it was sort of 10 years ago?
Yes, I think Britain is a lot sort of moved on a lot more since 2007 when I sort of transitioned. But it's a case that I've been sort of traveling. I love my holidays. It's a case that I've been to places like Morocco, Turkey, Spain, and I've never had any problems traveling whatsoever. I've just come back from Egypt now, and it's the people don't generally have an issue. It's something we see at the moment. I think there is a little bit of a political football with regards to press and politicians around trans issues that I'm sure you're aware of, but and that does cause anxiety for trans people. But like I say, I think in general people are very positive towards you.
Great. And do you feel the pressure, sort of if you start a new role, do you feel the pressure to make people in work aware of your journey, or is it something that you don't really feel that's necessary?
I've never found it necessary. It's something I spent a huge part of my life hiding the fact that I was trans, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life trying to hide the fact that I'm trans. So I don't particularly hide it, and I am happy to talk about it. But I don't actually make an issue with it either, or make that the subject of conversation. It's something which I am, but it's something I don't hide.
And do you think that could be a problem for some people?
I've never sort of experienced any of that, but ultimately I think if they do have a problem with it, it's important to note it's their problem. And I think policies and procedures help to control a lot of that. It's a point of making sure that whatever their problems are, if they address it correctly through their organisation, then it's a case that that organisation needs to address it back, really.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're currently working as a finance, so it's head of treasury and investment at the moment. So you've progressed in your finance career quite a lot since over the last decade. How have you found working in finance?
Yeah, finance is an interesting role, really. There's a variety of jobs you can sort of have in finance, which is tax, audit, financial accounting, treasury, where I am, capital accounting. And it's quite a varied role, really. And it's about sort of identifying what it is you want out of finance, what you enjoy doing, really, if you're going down that route and getting a lot of experience in it. My personal route was sort of taking that sort of financial qualification of ACCA and getting my studies there, and then decided the route I wanted to take. But I think I was helped by my hobbies and networking through hobbies, where I was able to gain as much experience as I could, really, before sort of stepping up on that ladder. I wrote away to about 14, 15 different accounting companies offering my services for free just to gain experience. And that's how I've sort of built up my role within financial accounting, really, to where I am. And it's about not chasing the money first, really. It's about getting the experience first, and the money will come, basically. It's in that role.
And finding the right organisations as well, isn't it? And there's so many different, finance can be different in every single company, can't it? Because you've worked across public and private sector.
Absolutely. I mean, we all work to the basic FRS kind of standards, really. But absolutely, when you're moving into charities from private sector, then it's a case that you're using SOAP accounting and things. And there are sort of bits of nuances with regards to tax treatment and VAT treatment in every organisation you work, yes.
We've seen a lot of demand over the last sort of 12 months for good finance professionals. It seems to be a skill set that's in demand. And you were saying that you're really busy at the moment. So it sounds like it's a busy time in finance.
Absolutely. It's a very difficult job to find the right person for it. And like I say, it is about sort of getting the experience that you require for the role, really.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today, Sophie. I know that it's been a very personal sort of topic for you. And I know when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that actually it's something that you wouldn't have been able to necessarily talk about years ago. And sort of, I just, one last question really is why you feel that, that it's something that you would want to talk about now?
I think now it's a long time has passed, and I've got over a lot of the issues I had when I first sort of transitioned and had the problems. But I'm seeing a lot of sort of struggles with trans people at the moment with newspapers and things. And I think it's something which is important for people to understand, really, the realities of it, and that people are not trying to trick people when they're going through gender reassignment or anything like that. It's just somebody's life, really. And to bear that in mind, really, for people.
And I'm really grateful that you shared your story, because I think it's one of these things that not many people do sort of openly talk about. And I think today you've really given some food for thought for any employers listening, but also some encouragement as well to anyone going through a transition themselves, who may be having certain experiences. So thank you so much for chatting to me today, Sophie.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No worries. And thank you to everyone for listening. Please do subscribe to Hoop HR Highlights on Spotify or on YouTube for any future episodes. Thank you.